I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists today, who will be discussing the right to offend oppressors and genociders, and the problematic issues of white people attempting to set the boundaries of racism and acceptable speech. We have with us Jooneed Khan, who will moderate the panel and guide us with questions. He's a legendary journalist from Quebec who was one of a kind at his time, able to criticize imperialist wars. With us also is Kanenhariyo, Seth Lefort, the war chief of the Tyendinaga Mohawk Bear Clan. He is beyond explanation, and his revolutionary spirit uplifts the Haudenosaunee people. Kanahus Manuel leads the Kanahus Warriors encampment facing off pipeline expansions into the Secwepemc people's territory. She comes from a line of unmatched defenders of the land. Margaret Kimberley, a leading voice in the African diaspora in the colony of the USA, and co-founder, executive director, and senior columnist for Black Agenda Report. Her first book, Presidential Black America and the Presidents, just came out last year. Stanley Cohen, longtime legal warrior for the liberation of Indigenous peoples in Turtle Island and Palestine. His battles defending resistance to colonization span from the Oka crisis to the Gaza blockades. And last but not least, Dr. Wilmer Leon, professor of political science, and nationally syndicated columnist and radio host. Thank you all for joining us today. I guess maybe we'll start with any thoughts you had on this statement and on the debacle of Zionist bullying that's happening right now around these tweets.
You mean other than it being banned in parts of Canada and unavailable on Twitter? No. In fact, I find it interesting because just this week I was banned by Twitter after 10 years and 450,000 tweets. The first basis was ridiculous, and when I exposed it and showed it, they agreed, yes, they were wrong. So then they slipped into this generic notion that it's hate speech and incitement to violence. And so I had published today through friends a very long piece in Counterpunch, which applying constitutional law, international law, and human rights destroys it. I think what's most essential is that, and you pointed it out, the struggle for Indigenous freedom, the struggle for national liberation, the struggle for humanity, for decency, knows no bounds, no borders, no oaths, no anthems. We are one community with one voice. We may be facing different beasts in different places, but the struggle remains the same. And you're absolutely right. In the 21st century, they have shifted from COINTELPRO, targeting Indigenous uprisings by assassination, into controlling social media, into trying to sit on top of, own the narrative in order to prevent us from spreading the message, from engaging with sisters and brothers throughout the world and pushing back.
You know, many of these Zionists tweeted online that if I was in Palestine, I would be killed for these tweets. And I mean, they are right. Many Palestinians have been murdered, assassinated for much less than what I tweeted, including writing poetry and ending up in jail for it, or being assassinated for being a author of fiction that is critical of Zionism, like Ghassan Kanafani, or being a cartoonist like Najil Ali, who was assassinated in the 1980s for his caricatures. In fact, the Zionists online in this campaign doxed my whole family, put all the names of my children, their pictures, my wife, her whole genealogy. They did everything that they could do within the context of Canada, because, of course, if I was in Palestine, my wife and kids would have been arrested. Our extended relatives would have been rounded up and interrogated. Our home would have been blown up and demolished. The Zionists, what they did here is they decided to put pictures of my house from the outside with the address of it, and sending death threats on Twitter. So they did the most that they can do, I think, within the context of a Canadian state where they can't liquidate openly somebody like me.
It's interesting to me how they will perceive the statement that if you were in Palestine, that you would be assassinated, as though that is a statement of legitimacy, when in fact it is a statement of illegitimacy, particularly in countries that claim to be democratic. The oppression of speech is one of the most fundamental oppressive measures that a country can take. And in the United States, whether it's Tony Blinken or whether it's President Biden, and they're on the world stage talking about supporting sovereignty, they're talking about supporting democracy, and the United States is sending over $3 billion a year to a colony that is in direct violation of not only what the United States stands for, but what the United Nations is supposed to stand for, and what I would think most other governments and entities that consider themselves to be democratic stand for. So they are exposing themselves for the horrendous regime that they are. And I'm preaching to the choir here, but it is incredibly troubling, and that's I guess one of the greatest understatements of the day. Because one of the things that I in the years that I've had you on the show, and that we have developed our relationship, I've never heard you call for the violence against anyone. I've never heard you threaten anyone. I've only heard you reporting reality as you understand the reality to be. And based upon my research, not only do you call it as you see it, but you tend to see it as it is. And so I'll stop there, but ask this one question. Can you tell me who are the specific entities that are attacking you?
Of course, the Zionist lobbying organizations in Canada, starting with the Canada-Israel Jewish Affairs, and B'nai B'rith, and the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And behind them is a bunch of quote-unquote journalists that are purveyors of hate here in Canada that are very well known, like Jonathan Kay. And there's Hillel Nuer from the United Nations Watch, who's been doxing my extended family, putting up the genealogy of my wife, and so forth. Very, very nasty people. But, just a few hours ago, I just noticed that there was a joint committee between the Congress and the Parliament of Canada that is being held today in Washington, D.C., where they brought in the executives of the social media companies, Meta and Twitter and TikTok. And they started discussing with the Twitter executives the accounts of Laith Marouf and his tweets. This is how ridiculous it is, and how nefarious it is that they have such influence to call in such a special committee to address my tweets. I mean, personally, I thought my Twitter account is insignificant in the bigger issue of propaganda against Zionism and the war against for the liberation of Palestine. But it seems it has struck some nerve with all these Jewish supremacists that they're being called Jewish supremacists.
I just wanted to say that, first of all, there's something else going on here, and that's the tie between big tech and the state. And I think that's something that, while the issue here is hate speech directed against you, first of all, and this attempt to ruin you, ruin your life, I think we have to talk about the ties between the state and these social media companies. Now, you have these groups that are, ostensibly private organizations who also have connections with the state in Canada, that the Prime Minister would mention you by name. So I think we have to talk about democracy, or rather the lack of democracy, that this alleged free speech we have. If we say something that powerful people don't like, then they will make an example of you. So now they have chosen you, they've chosen others in the past. But collusion was a big word a couple of years ago. But we have collusion between the state and big tech and others that ensures that there is no free speech, that these alleged democracies claim they value free speech, but if you use it in a way that they don't like, then in fact you don't have it. And I also wanted to ask, is it possible for you to charge these people who doxed you and posted your kids' names and your address? Can they be charged with hate speech? Is that possible? I was just wondering.
Well, I am not sure how these laws in a colonial setting like Canada and the colonial courts would respond to complaints against these individuals. We all know how the police deal with when women are being abused and call the police, and or when people of color, racialized communities, call in the police for a problem. I personally called the Montreal police and informed them about the pictures of my house from outside on Twitter with the address and the death threats, and they didn't do anything about it. Twitter didn't even remove those tweets when the complaint, I complained about those tweets and they didn't remove them. And since I have been locked out of my Twitter account by Twitter, so I have no ability to interact online.